Hey everyone, Eric here. Before we get to our discussion today with Dixon Agbaji from Beijing University, I wanted to remind you about becoming a China Africa Project subscriber. Only by being a subscriber will you get access to all of the great content that's on our website, including the daily news feed, the China Africa Experts Network, and exclusive analysis that helps you make sense of all the issues. You'll also get our daily email newsletter, which is by far the most comprehensive digest of China Africa news that you'll find anywhere. To find out more, visit ChinaAfricaProject.com/subscribe and be sure to use the promo code podcast for a special offer of 1 month free with your annual subscription. Once again, that's ChinaAfricaProject.com/subscribe.
The China and Africa podcast is brought to you in partnership with the Africa-China Reporting Project at Wits University in Johannesburg. The ACRP promotes balanced, considered reporting on Africa-China relations through innovative training programs held throughout the year. More information at africachinareporting.co.za.
Hello and welcome to another edition of the China in Africa podcast. I'm Eric Olander, and as always, I'm joined by Cobus van Staden, a senior China-Africa researcher at the South African Institute of International Affairs. A very good morning to you, Cobus.
Good morning.
Cobus, we have talked at length about the growing population of African students who are going to China for education. In fact, they just had a university fair in Ethiopia, in Addis Ababa, where Chinese universities came to recruit students, and it was hugely popular. And what stood out about it was the fact that Chinese universities are actually going to Africa to recruit students. This is not really a phenomenon that as far as I know, and maybe I'm missing something here, that U.S. and European students, universities are doing there. And it's something that we hear the cries out of Washington from people like Aubrey Ruby, who we've interviewed many times on this show, and other African advocates and policy analysts to say that the U.S. is missing out on a huge opportunity about not engaging African students to come and study in the United States as they used to. But now in the United States, of course, not only Africans, but it's more difficult for all foreign students to get visas and scholarships and whatnot. And the key issue here is the connections that young people are making at a very formidable time in their lives that will then stay with them for the rest of their lives. And I want Cobus to read you part of an admissions essay, and this is what really makes it real, that our guest today, who we're going to speak to, wrote about his admission to a university in Beijing. He said, "My admission into Beijing University's Yenching Academy is a feat I will treasure all my life because it is a dream come true. Also, it will be a novel experience for me as I have never been outside the Nigerian borders. Just as my classmates stated over 5 years ago, the 21st century is the Chinese century. I cannot think of a better place to study." Cobus, that is it right there. And that is going to pay geopolitical dividends for the Chinese for decades and decades and decades, as tens of thousands of African students really share that same sentiment.
Yes, it's amazing to think that at the moment the only country that has more African students than China is France, and there's more African students in China than in the UK and the US combined. And this is really, it really does shape the future. It doesn't only mean that the kind of future elite is that their thinking is shaped by China, but also that they get to know all kinds of other compatriots from other African countries in China. So it's essentially the very network becomes located in China.
And I think it's very important to make clear that there is a very wide range of the quality of education in China. Not every African student who goes to China has a good experience or is coming back with a useful degree. In fact, in South Africa, there was some reporting by one of your independent media news outlets that said that a lot of African students or South African students are going and getting really just junk degrees. The professors don't speak English very well. The programs aren't very well thought out. So this is not a universal phenomenon. But where we are talking about at the elite universities like Beijing University, Fudan University, Tsinghua University, that is not the case. They are getting excellent educations there. And one of the students there is Dixon Agbaji, who is a Nigerian student and pursuing a master's in China studies at Beijing University's prestigious Yenching Academy, where he's studying political economy and Mandarin. He did his undergraduate degree at the University of Calabar in Nigeria, and he's co-authored several journal articles and published journal articles on corruption, security, development, and foreign policy. And we are so grateful that he joins us on his lunch break from the campus of Beijing University. Dixon, thank you so much for taking the time. We really appreciate it.
Hey, hello, Eric. Thank you very much for having me. So honored.
Well, we are honored to have you on the program. I think what you should do maybe just to start is just give us a brief introduction, what we call your China story. I read a little bit of your essay there about what kind of got you excited about going to China, but we'd like to hear a little bit more about what was the initial motivation for you to study in China, what your parents thought of it, and just give us a little bit of an introduction to who you are and what brought you to Beijing.
Okay, so first, one of the first exposures I had to the Chinese society was through movies. So I got fascinated by watching films like Kung Fu Panda. So I've always had this idea that, these Chinese guys, their culture is very unique and I'd love to experience it on a one-on-one basis. So I got into the University of Calabar and we started discussing about communism, Marxism, and other theories that can explain the political economy of countries. And I got interested in the fact that the Chinese society was very unique in the sense that even though it adopted systems like the Soviet Union, even after the Soviet Union crumbled, it still existed, which was like mind blowing. And I was like, okay, no, I just have to be in this place. So I started studying. I started reading up books about the Chinese society. Then I think, we wrote some articles about China, basically. And I think that was what spurred my interest to come down to Beijing to study. So it was first fascination and now a research interest.
So when you applied to go to study in China, what kind of education did you have in mind? Like what differentiated the Chinese education system from those in other countries, and what made it special for you?
Yeah. So for me, China has a very huge role to play in the world in the coming years. So I thought that what better place to study if you want to remain relevant in the world to come? Why not just go to China and understand how the Chinese system works, how the Communist Party works, and China's relationship, especially with Africa. So I saw Beijing as the ideal place. Secondly, there is like this international base of our students and the Laoshis, the professors here who teach. So they have like different vast areas of expertise that they can, bring in different ideas to spur classes and also spur thoughts of the students. So I felt, with this international curriculum and a student base, I can learn more, I can develop myself, grow my network, and, become very relevant in the nearest future. So that's what really captured my mind towards Beijing. And I think that is what is quite different from what we have outside. So you have like a rising power that is trying its best to, beat America. So it's like, I just need to be here.
In places like in South Africa, I've had a chance to talk to a lot of students at Wits University, where Cobus used to teach, and also at University of Nairobi, and certainly in the U.S. We associate university with really a wide range of ideas that get thrown out into the table, hashed out. Some are contentious, some are controversial, some are sensitive. And in places like Kenya or South Africa or the United States, there's not really much concern about any consequences of talking about those things. That's not the case in China. In China, there are things that we can talk about, and there are certain things, we can't talk about. I'm not going to get into it here because I don't want to provoke anybody, but we all know what those things are that we can't talk about. And so I guess I'm curious about when you talk about the kind of education that you're getting there, is it difficult for you to navigate some of the politics in China that make those kind of open discussions that you are familiar with in Nigeria and very common in Nigeria? But now you come to China and you have to be a little bit more sensitive to the topics that are controversial.
Yeah, I understand you. That's the case here. It's not every issue we need to we have access to because of limited information. And I have this idea at the back of my mind that I'm coming to a new excuse me, please. So I'm coming to a new environment. So they have value structures already put in place. They have a system that is working for them already. So if there are issues that I don't need to look into, and then there's this censorship about those issues, then there's no need for me even looking into them. China is a very big place, so there are other research interests, there are other research areas I can venture into. There's a reason why their system is placed that way, and for me, it works for them. So I think, if the people are not complaining that much, so I don't see any reason. But I'm enjoying my time so far here. It's very revealing. The students from different countries are bringing in their different perspectives, and to me, that's what really matters going forward.
Just one more question about the curriculum. In many cases in universities in China, students are required to also study Xi Jinping thought, and it's increasingly because it's has been implemented in the writings of the party. It's also supposed to be taught in some educational institutions, as far as I understand. Do you also study that? And what is that like?
Okay, for now, no, I've not ventured into Xi Jinping's thoughts. I've not done that yet. But what we've been doing so far has been tracing China's history from the ancient era to the 20th century, where they had the civil wars and other things with the rise of the CCP up until the reformist periods by Deng Xiaoping, and then up to this particular period. But I've heard instances of the study of Xi's thoughts. That notwithstanding, I think it's more like for people to, or for the Chinese to get a basic understanding of what the system is like, what their president, what their number one man thinks about China going forward, the rise of China. Xi Jinping keeps talking about the Belt and Road, new initiatives where China is would play a major role in the world, with America declining a little bit, taking a backseat a little bit in certain issues. It is up to China to come out strong to say, okay, assert its position. And I think this is influenced by two major factors: the size of its economy and the size of its population, and a third one, and its technological base. So I think it's just for people to understand what the perception of their leader is in the current global system.
Let's pick up the conversation on perceptions, because I think that's a really important part of all of this, because you are somebody who sits in the middle, where obviously you're expert in your home country in Nigeria, and you've written a lot about it, and you've excelled there academically, and now you're in China, where you're bringing a different type of expertise and you're interacting with students. And one of the things that I find so interesting is that in China, oftentimes people have a very distorted view of the outside world, in part because it's been shaped by a highly restricted media. People get to see only what the Communist Party and what official media allows people to see. It's not an open, dynamic, free media like you have in Nigeria. Similarly, in Nigeria and other parts of Africa, and I would say this also extends to the US and Europe as well, people have a very distorted view of China that is oftentimes filtered through social media or, the negative narrative that we've talked about for many, many years here. It's not a holistic type of view. And you are someone who sits in the middle. Talk to me a little bit about you confronting in class and with your professors and your classmates, both African, international, and Chinese, about those different perceptions of the other. And tell us a little bit about how those conversations go that you have on campus.
Okay, so I'll just start a little bit backwards. So before coming down to China, I was thinking, the Chinese system, even with how fascinated I've been about it, like their food, the restrictions, and I'm like, how would I survive here? But coming down here, I realized that things are quite different. My perception has changed about China drastically, especially with their food. And then coming to classes where you'd interact with professors who are, experts in their fields, and then you ask certain questions, and they tell you their perception, their perspective about that particular issue. So it's not like we have a China-centric view of everything we're discussing in class. No, not at all. We have different perspectives, because so if the lecturers are giving us just a China-centric view, it won't make sense, especially to the American students in class, because I think they're like one of the most audible students in class, so they're very critical of the Chinese system, and they're like, they keep posing questions, and lecturers keep answering based on the perception of what the situation is like. So we're not giving an entirely China-centric view. No, we're giving different perspectives. So it's like leading us through what China believes, what the world believes. Make your decision. So that's the way our classes have been so far.
Support for this podcast comes from the Africa-China Reporting Project at Wits University School of Journalism in Johannesburg. The ACRP provides reporting grants, workshops, and other professional development opportunities for both African and Chinese journalists. Follow the ACRP on Twitter at Wits China Africa or visit africachinareporting.co.za for information about grants and upcoming seminars.
So in spending time in China, frequently when one spends time overseas, especially when you're studying, it changes your perspective on your own country as well. So what does spending time in China, how has it changed your perceptions of Nigeria?
It's been very interesting here. I came in here and I was like, oh boy, these guys are so developed in just 30 years. Like, what I've been thinking about China from home, it's quite different from what I'm seeing here. Like, I came here and I was like, oh, I'm looking out for potholes, and I've not seen potholes, and I know in Nigeria, like, there are potholes within potholes at home. So, the construction, the development rate of China has been amazing. Secondly is how hospitable the people are here. As a foreigner, and before coming here, I have zero proficiency of Mandarin, so it's like people who can speak English are always available to help you out. To just ensure that you find your way, you navigate your way through Beijing. Secondly is thirdly rather, it's politically, though their system is a closed system, you just have one party system, but it's working. That's I keep discussing with my colleagues from Nigeria, and I'm like, it's working for them. In 30 years, this party has taken them away from a very poor region to the second largest economy, pulling over 700 million with as the economy grows. So I think it's working. So we need to design a system within Nigeria that would also take cognizance of the different aspects that determine Nigerians' politics, like economy and religion. Because what we just do at home is we copy and paste. Oh, this system is working in America, let's copy and we paste, without bringing in what really makes Nigeria unique. That's what is different from China. They have a political system that is so unique to themselves. They have unique Chinese characteristics within their political system, and it is really working for them. So I think for me, majorly, it's on the political scene, it's just quite different from what we have in Nigeria.
It's interesting that you say you kind of speak favorably of the Chinese political system, in part because it's a dictatorship or an authoritarian country by the Communist Party. Those are words that they use themselves. But that's what it is. And there is no free media. There is no multi-party system. Nigeria itself in the 70s and 80s used to be a dictatorship as well under military governments, and it still didn't work. And so I'm curious, what are the specifics? I mean, it's obvious that you and a lot of people go to China and they see this incredible infrastructure. By the way, I have to say, Americans now go to China and look at the infrastructure and go, holy cow. When they see the mobile payments, they see the bullet trains, they see the highways. I mean, it's better than the infrastructure we have in many parts of the U.S. So that's not just an African phenomena anymore, which is very interesting as well. But that being said, what do you think practically can be brought out of the Chinese political system into a system that is as vibrant, dynamic, chaotic, confrontational as the Nigerian system is?
Okay, first I would say it's a party structure, though I'm not a supporter of an autocratic regime or authoritarian regime. I believe that freedom of speech and other freedoms need to be available. Like, you need to give the people the opportunity to select their leaders. But something that stands out in the Chinese system is that they think of the people more. So it's more like whatever they're doing, their projects, they're thinking of how far the Chinese economy can go. How can the people improve? Now, studying here so far, I've learned two things. That the Chinese perception of rights is quite different from the American and probably other Western perceptions of rights. So in America, in Europe, when you hear of rights, you're thinking of, the fundamental human rights, freedom to life, association, to just freedom of speech, free media, and other things. But here in China, I've noticed they're just surrounded by two basic things: sustenance and development. Can this new government policy ensure that there's development in my area, there's development in my region, there's infrastructure, there are trains, local rural areas are connected to the urban areas? And then would this government policy give me more money into my pockets? Would I have more food to eat? So those are the two things that I've noticed that the Chinese are much more concerned about. It's more like an economic idea. So they have the interest of the people, and whatever policy they bring, they attach these two indices to it to show the people that, okay, whatever we're doing, it would improve your lives, and it will also enrich your pockets. So I think this is something that the Nigerian government should bear in mind while moving forward, and the fact that they should also think of the indices that makes Nigeria unique, that can never ever be separated from the Nigerian system, if you want to talk about it, which include religion and ethnicity.
How would you like to see the relationship between China and Nigeria develop in the future? Like which particular fields do you think Chinese involvement would really help Nigeria into the future?
Okay, so between 2002 and 2018, China's investment in Nigeria has grown over 600%. So at 2002, it was at I think $2 billion, and now it's about over $13 billion. So China is really putting in a lot of effort into Nigeria. And then I think I read a report 2 days ago about from the Global Attitude Survey. It says that Nigeria now has the second highest good perception of China. So Nigeria stood at 61 as at last year, and now it's at 70. I think Russia was at 65 and now it's at 71. So it's just 1 point behind Russia. So there's like this good perception of China, and China's increasing investments within Nigeria. So I believe that going forward, one major area China can invest in Nigeria, to ensure that their relationship are quite sustainable, is in the area of trade. So Nigeria's oil is very essential for the Chinese economy, so because of the steady electricity here and other projects that the Chinese government embark on. So it's more like to help the Chinese government sustain its economy and also bring in increased revenue into Nigeria. Then the other aspect is in infrastructural development. China has been working tirelessly within the infrastructure to develop the infrastructure sector in Nigeria, constructing roads, railways, and other things, seaports. Now we have the free trade zone within Lagos and Ogun State. So these are ways to ensure that Chinese companies come into Nigeria, they produce their goods and then sell out to other areas. So it's more like increasing Nigeria's industrial base. So it's more like diversifying Nigeria's economy, taking it away from petroleum to other areas like manufacturing and agriculture. So I think these are two basic areas where going forward Nigeria-China relationship can be further improved. And there's also the cultural aspect. There's also the cultural aspects to it. So you're having increasing Chinese cultures into Nigeria. We have I think 2 Confucius institutes in Nigeria. I know one is in the University of Nigeria, and then they have other 4 Chinese institutes around Nigeria. I'm not specific of their location. So there's also the importation of Chinese culture into Nigeria, and I think going forward, these areas would be very essential.
So it's clear that there's a lot of excitement on your part towards what you're seeing in China, and also what China is doing in Nigeria. So that's okay. We've established that. What's interesting, I want to pick up a little bit on is how do you feel about the United States? Because the United States oftentimes positions itself as a rival of China, and there is a battle for hearts and minds in Africa for young people like you. That and we think as Americans that our soft power is unrivaled because Beyoncé, Jay-Z, all of the different soft power culture that we bring into ACON, you name it, anything that we bring, movies, music, culture, all of that. But there's a big difference between people liking Jay-Z and people liking American policy. And so I'm curious about, as you're learning about China now, and even you're interacting with American students in Beijing at Beijing University, what are your views of the United States and how it engages with Africa? And because you wrote in your essay the 21st century is the Chinese century, quoting one of your classmates, that implies that it's not the American century anymore. And that comes as a shock for many people listening in Washington to this program. So tell us a little bit about your views, good, bad, and ugly, of U.S. power in Nigeria and in Africa as it relates to the Chinese.
America lost its position as Nigeria's largest exporter of oil, and then China came in. I just want to make us 3 comments. Number one is this: America and China, looking back, share similar qualities. America in the late 19th centuries, early 20th centuries was seen, like the perception of China right now is quite similar to how Europe viewed America. So you'd hear things like okay, fake products come from, or inferior products come from America, or that the intellectual property rights, America was not, holding on to its own side of international intellectual property rights. And then at the peak of its own development, America hosted its first Olympic Games. The same thing here will have the same scenario is playing out here in China in this 21st century. China hosted the Beijing 2008 Olympic Games. China is also seen as not, holding on to intellectual property rights laws and other things. So it's more like they both share similarities in their development. But looking at America's soft power in Africa, Nigeria to be precise, it's weakening. It's weakening because now there's a lot more interest towards China because of you can look at issues like the South-South cooperation. So it's more like African countries see China as like a brother, let me put it that way. Because of this close relationship between the Chinese government and other African leaders, and then there's also this increased investment there in Africa. I'm not saying that the American soft power is not effective enough, but it is winning. Weakening, and then the Chinese, on the other hand, are increasing how they get into Africa, how they penetrate into Africa. So there's increased money. There are institutions, educational institutions being established here and there. So it's penetrating. It's even though it's small, but it's growing at a rapacious rate. Aside America, that is quite reducing its investment in Africa. Let me put it that way. So I think that's what really marks them out differently. Both countries have similarities in their rise. And I think the Chinese, in fact, I don't just think, I believe the Chinese economy would surpass the American economy in the years to come.
When you speak with Africans in Africa about China, there is frequently quite negative narratives. The most famous one being, China's just here to exploit Africa. China's just here to colonize Africa for, again. So what do those narratives look like to you from the perspective of actually living in China at the moment?
First of all, I think those are myths. That I think one of the most interesting myths about China-Africa relation is the land grabbing myth. That China comes to own African lands to grow food for China while also using Chinese farmers. But on the contrary, I think I was reading a report by what's she called, Deborah Baltingham. I'm not very sure of the name. So she was the director of China-Africa's research initiative at Johns Hopkins University, and then she shows what she mentioned in the report was this, that it's the contrary. That's not what China is doing. As a matter of fact, the private firms, the private bodies that are involved in farming and other landed activities within Africa keep complaining of the limited support they get from the Chinese government, and the purpose for their investments that are happening are not even connected to the land grabbing, as a matter of fact, but it's connected to commodities. So you have investments in cottons, rubbers, and sugar. So that's on the one hand. So I don't think China is like trying to colonize Africa. As a matter of fact, it's helping to improve our economy, which is very, very crucial for us. Now, it's about improving the industrial base in Nigeria, improving the agricultural sector. Now, there are agricultural firms, especially, let me give you an instance, Green Agriculture West Africa Limited. So they are currently operating within Nigeria, and they've been operating since 2006, setting up farms in places like Kebbi, Niger State, Jigawa, Abuja, just to boost food production and then to teach local farmers the best farming practices. So it's more like a win-win scenario for China. And then there's another, I think one of the major issues is addressing the trade imbalance within the relationship between China and Nigeria or other African countries. So I think it's best in the interest of the Chinese government and Chinese firms to like come into Africa to produce their goods instead of producing in China and then exporting into Africa. It's a lot more costly. It's expensive, right? So that's why we have different trade zones within Africa to help with proximity and also bringing in Chinese firms. So what we need to do, as a matter of fact, as Africans, is to remove some barriers that would help the Chinese firms operate well within Africa or within Nigeria once they come in. So I don't think it's like recolonizing Africa. No, it's just a win-win scenario.
What do you want to do after you graduate, when you go back to Nigeria? What's your plan?
Okay, so I am somebody who is interested in teaching. I think I would make money. I think I would make my money from talking. so I would have to go back to teach. And with my unique experience in China, I think I should be able to bring something to the table to impact people, to give like a new perspective of what China is like. Especially in my alma mater, the University of Calabar. If I'm to work there, that would mean like I'm the only one that would mean that I'll be the only one in my department, say political science, to have an extensive knowledge on China, Africa's or China, Nigeria's relations. And I think that would be very ideal. Secondly is into NGOs. I'm somebody who's interested in climate change issues, and I think one of my next research here in China will be the AIIB's role in the climate change agenda, because one of the reasons why America, Japan, and Canada, except it's changed its mind, I think in 2017, if I'm not mistaken, to become founding members of the AIIB was because of some environmental issues. So I'm interested in learning what China's role is like on the environmental front.
Well, we wish you the very best of luck in all of that. It's been a pleasure getting to know you, and very, very exciting to hear about your experiences at the Yenching Academy at Beijing University. Dixon David Agbaji is a Nigerian student, master's student in Beijing at the prestigious Yenching Academy, where he is studying international relations, economy, economics, and basically understanding the Chinese system in a way that he's going to bring it back to Nigeria and bring parts of it and the inspiration for it. And it's just an inspiration for the future of China-Africa relations to see so many young people like you who are actually in the middle of it and doing some really incredible things. So congratulations on that. Hey, Dixon, if people want to get in touch with you, are you on social media for them to reach out and say hello?
Yes. I'm on Facebook, I'm on Instagram, Twitter. My Twitter handle is Dixon Agbaji. My name on Facebook is Dixon David Agbaji. I'm also on LinkedIn. You can just check Dixon David Agbaji. So it's just basically Dixon David Agbaji. Once you type that in, you
Fantastic. And we'll put links to all of your social media channels in the show notes and on our website. So if people want to reach out and say hello and connect with you and start some networking for you ahead of your graduation, that would be great. Once again, your lunch break is almost over, so our time is up, and we really, really are grateful that you took some time off of from studies to speak with us. Really appreciate it.
Thank you very much. I really appreciate the time.
Gobis, I'm laughing because as I was listening to Dixon, about halfway through the conversation, all I could think about in my head was the U.S. and Europe are screwed. Completely, totally, 100% screwed in Africa. It is as clear as day to me that 10, 15 years from now, okay, it's not something that today, the level of awareness of China in places like, Nigeria, and even at the political level, is still extraordinarily low. But what's going to happen is this wave of Dixons are going to start coming back to Africa. Graduates from Beijing University, from Tsinghua, from Fudan, from Zhejiang, all these universities are going to start coming back, and they're going to start building up experience like Dixon. And you saw what Dixon was saying and how he was framing things. It was in a very Sinocentric view of the world. He was even saying win-win. And he was talking about things in a very kind of China-friendly way. Now, I'm not saying that he's been co-opted or he's been brainwashed. No. But he's doing what students do, which is absorb the information that's around him. This is why you have these kind of programs, for geopolitical reasons. In 10, 15 years, when Dixon is a professor or when he's in politics or whatever, his relationship network will be anchored in China. That's why I think the Americans and some of the Europeans, not all Europeans, the French are still engaged, but the French engagement is in a francophone world. It's not in an African world. It's a francophone world. That's very, very different. The Chinese are drawing students from across the continent, from lots of different languages. When I was in Beijing, I met from Togo, from Senegal, from lots of francophone countries. And in France, at Sciences Po and at some of the other universities, you get only francophone kids. So there's a big difference in that. But I think 10, 15 years out, this is going to pay dividends for the Chinese that they have no idea. And the Americans and the Europeans are making a critical geopolitical mistake by not investing in young people like this.
Yeah, I mean, I completely agree. It's, it's because the thing is, it's not only that all of these bright Nigerians that are essentially being lost to the West, if you want to see it that way, but also, when I've spent time with these African student communities in China. In a lot of cases, they overcome all of the language barriers that exist within China by all just using Mandarin as a lingua franca. So it's a situation where not only future country elites are linked to China, but the very connections between African elites run through China. Kind of the way that someone from Cote d'Ivoire and the way that someone from Tanzania would have a connection is via China. And those networks are incredibly valuable. They're going to be valuable for the next, for decades and decades into the future.
Honestly, I get chills listening to this interview because this was a different interview for me. It's not what I expected. We've interviewed a number of different students over the years, and again, there's a certain rhythm to them all. But hearing, Dixon's worldview and how precise it was, and how he literally in his admissions essay said China is the 21st century is the Chinese century. That, by definition, implies it's no longer the American century. And if anybody who is in the State Department is listening to this show, take Dixon's word very, very seriously. I think he's going to go back to Nigeria, and he said it right up front. The United States used to be Nigeria's largest commercial partner, but it's not anymore because the United States, we make our own oil now. We don't need to import from Nigeria as much anymore. But they haven't backfilled it with other forms of engagement. They haven't backfilled it with other forms of commerce. It's not coming. And the Chinese, as he pointed out, are investing heavily into Nigerian infrastructure. Other point that I think is really important to bring up is that he brought up right in the beginning, and you've talked about this, is the Chinese soft power methods. So number one, Kung Fu. Ironic that he mentioned Kung Fu Panda, which is an American movie. So the Americans are actually contributing to Chinese soft power inadvertently. There's a certain irony there. But Kung Fu is something that's interesting because we've heard Bruce Lee and Kung Fu Panda come up repeatedly. So if I was Chinese propagandists, my advice, unsolicited as it may be, stop with CGTN and all your news that nobody pays attention to and just run Kung Fu movies 24 hours a day, and you will then get far more bang for your propaganda buck. I mean, clearly that's what people seem to be responding to. Never have we ever heard anybody go, I was inspired to go to China because I was watching a program on CGTN. I mean, right? I mean, but yet we hear over and over again, it is there's a slice of Chinese popular culture that really resonates. You wrote a paper on that a few years ago, if I recall. And then the second thing is the infrastructure as soft power. And I tell you, when I talk to Americans and Europeans, they discount that from start to finish. The fact that there are no potholes in Beijing, or at least on the big streets, there are potholes in Beijing, of course, but you don't see them on the big streets. That right there is a soft power campaign as a marketer. Come to my country. We don't have any potholes. But it is a very, very powerful message, that infrastructure diplomacy.
Yeah, you're so right. That's always the thing that Africans mention when they come to China. It's something that I think would be a little bit of a challenge to actually turn into a public diplomacy message because it's so easy to make it sound very condescending. But
it's a good point.
If one can turn it into some kind of message, it's going to be a potent message because it's the one takeaway that Africans always mention about China. It's like you can't believe it, like with the trains, the bridges. And I think increasingly, as you said, like, I think it's not only Africans who feel that way. I think anyone who goes to China feels that way.
Well, the way you do it is you wouldn't do it as a publicity campaign. You do it what the Chinese are doing right now is they're bringing over African journalists who just freely write about it and go, holy crap, I'm on a train that's going 400 kilometers an hour. 30 years ago, China was poorer than Africa. That's a story in the eyes of a lot of African journalists. And the more that they do these journalism exchanges and these junkets and these propaganda tours, that will then creep into the body politic. And I think that's what they're already doing. So, wow. That was fascinating. I really enjoyed that. Hey, listen, if you want to hear more voices of young people, we've got a whole section on our new website called Student Exchange, and it's exactly to do what we heard today, which is to get the perspective of people like Dixon. Go to our website at ChinaAfricaProject.com. At the very bottom, you'll see Student Exchange. It's being curated by Jodianne Wong, who is a student at Kenyon College in the U.S. So we have a student editor moderating and curating Student Exchange, which is really very neat, and we're sharing it out on our social network. If you would like to be a part of Student Exchange, if you're a student and you have views on China Africa, we would love to hear from you. Just email me, Eric, at ChinaAfricaProject.com, and I'll send it on to Jodianne. But this is all part of the new things that we're offering on our website at China Africa Project. We would love for you to subscribe to our new daily newsletter and also to become a subscriber for China Africa Project, because you get access to all of the great content on our website and the China Africa Experts Network. So there's a lot of great information. Subscriptions start at $149 per year, but we have a student rate at 50% off. Just use the promo code STUDENTS. So that's it for this edition of the China in Africa podcast. Copus and I will be back again next week with another show. For Copus van Staden in Johannesburg, I'm Eric Olander. Thank you so much for listening.
The discussion continues online. Head over to facebook.com/China Africa Project to share your thoughts on today's show. The guys are also on Twitter, where you can find Kobus at Studinsky or Eric at E. Olander. And be sure to sign up for the weekly China in Africa email newsletter by going to www.ChinaAfricaProject.com.